Right, good day everyone. We're going to be rounding off numbers to the nearest 5, 10, 100 and 1000. What helps a lot with rounding off numbers is a number line like this. So we're going to start with rounding off to the nearest 5, and I normally tell the children that they must draw this number line when they get to these questions, because there's a difference between rounding off to the nearest 5 and rounding off to 10, 100 and 1000. So it's separated from these round numbers. So what they do with their number lines when they've listed 0 to 10 is I want them to draw lines like this. So this is 5 on its own, and then there by the 10 and by the 0. And when we round off to the nearest 5, the two closest numbers becomes either the 5 or the 10 or go back to 0. So if we start on this side, the two closest numbers to 0 is 1 and 2. So when the number ends on a 1 or a 2, it will become 0 again when we round it off. When you have the number ending on 3 or 4, then it will round up to 5. When the number ends on a 5, then the number will stay 5. Then again on this side, two closest numbers to the value, so the 6 and the 7 is closest to 5. So when the number ends on a 6 or a 7, then it will round off to the 5. When then you will see the 8 and the 9 is closest to the 10, so 8 and 9 will round up to 10. Okay, so now we're just going to look at examples of questions like that. So here we have 11. So it ends on a 1. So go to your number line, you will see the number ends on a 1, then it rounds down to 0. So then when you round this off to the nearest 5, 11 becomes 10. Then on this side, the number ends on a 4, it's 54. So 4 is closest to 5, so this will be rounding up to 55. On this side, the number ends on a 5, so 5 stays 5. So then there's not going to be a change in this number. So it's rounding and it's still 105. Okay, so now we look at 9-digit numbers. Round off to the nearest 5. Remember, we only look at the units. So here we're going to look at the 4, the 7, and on the side the 0. So I'm just going to write this answer on that side. Remember, we use the rounding off sign. It's like an equal sign. It's a bit wavy. Okay. So the number ends on a 4. So if you go here, you will see the 4 is closest to 5. So it will round off to 5. So you're going to rewrite this whole number and you're going to end on a 5. So it's 138,746,525. Okay, now we look at B. It is 965,254,130. It ends on a 0, and we look, it's the same like the 5. It's a 0, it stays 0. So this one will not change. It will be 965,254,130. Okay, and then here we have 846,324,117. The number ends on a 7. So then 7 is one of the two numbers closest to 5 on this side. So your number will end on a 5 now when you round it off to the nearest 5. So you rewrite the whole number and end with a 5. 846,324,115. Okay. Now rounding off to the nearest 10. It is different from rounding off to 5, because we're not going to look at two closest numbers now. We're only going to draw a line here separating the 4 and the 5, and it works like this. If the number ends on a 5, 6, 7, 8 or a 9, it rounds up to the next 10. If it ends on a 4, 3, 2, 1 or a 0, then it rounds down, or we just say it stays the same. Okay, so now let's look at examples of easy numbers. Here again we have 11. I'm using the same numbers so you can see the difference between rounding up to 10 and 5 and so on. Right, so the number ends, look at the unit, because we're running off to the nearest 10. Okay, so the unit will tell us what's going to happen to the 10. So it ends on a 1, so that means it's going back to 0. So then round off using the rounding off sign, and the 1 goes back to 0, so then your answer will be 10. 54, rounding off, the 4 is on this side of that line, so it will go back to 0. So in this case, this will be 50. Right, now we have 105, but we are running off to the nearest 10. So we need to see what happens to the digit in the place of the tens, and what digit tells us what happens to it is the unit. So the number on the right hand side. So if it is a 5, now it's on this side of the line. So that means it's going to round up. So this is going to become a 1 bigger 10. So then this 0 will go 1 up in terms of the children's way of speaking. So that will change from 0 and will become a 1 in the tens place. So then we will say this will round up to 110. Okay, because that 10, that the digit here in the tens place, it goes one number up, becomes one number more. Right, now we're going to test this on 9-digit numbers. This is 138,746,524. So we are running off to the nearest 10. We're looking at the tens, but the unit is telling us what's going to happen to the 10. Okay, so in this place, the unit is a 4, so that means it's going to round back to 0. I'm just going to write this answer here as well. So then this will be, all the numbers will stay the same except for the last part. So then 138,746,000. Now remember the 4 goes back to 0. So then you will have 520. Okay, now let's look at the next one. This number ends on a 0. The unit is a 0. We need to see what happens to the tens. So if it is 0, it stays 0. So then this number is not going to change. 965,254,130. And then the last one, we want to know what's happening to the tens, and which digit is telling us what's happening to it is the unit. So the unit is 7. So go back to your number line here. 7 is on this side of that line. So 7 will go up to the next 10. What is the next 10 after? And you'll see this is 10 already. So what's the next 10 after 10? That will be 20 if you count in tens. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So then when you round this up to the nearest 10, you're going to rewrite all these digits except for the last part. 846,324, and then 100, and now this will become 20. Remember the digits, all of them will change to a 0 when you're rounding off to the nearest 10. Okay, now we're going to round off to the nearest 100. Again, we need a number line. So here with the number line, now we have tens. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and then 100. Because the tens will tell us what's going to happen to the 100. Just like with the number line running off to the nearest 10, we're just going to draw one line here separating these values with the values on the right hand side. So if the 10 is either a 10 or a 20 or a 30 or a 40, the number is going to round back to 0. If the 10 is either 50, 60, 70, 80 or 90, the number will be rounding up to the next 100. Okay, now let's look at an example. So this is 15. I'm not going to look at the unit anymore because the unit is not the one that tells me what's going to happen to the 100. It is the 10. You can see there's no hundreds here, but the 10 will still tell us whether we're going to have 100 or not. Okay, so there's a 10. So then go to your number line. 10 tells us it's going to go back to 0. So then your answer in this case will be 0, because the previous the value the 100, if you have 100 and just going backwards, you will go back to 0. Right, so let's look at 38. We look at, when we round off to the nearest 100 again, we have to look at the tens. The tens are telling us what happens to the 100. In this case again, there's no 100 here, but we can still look at what the 10 looks like. So in this case, we are on this side of this line again, which means we're going to be going back to 0 because this is 30. So when you've got 30, you go back to 0. So when you round off to the nearest 100, your answer in this case will be 0. Now the last one, in the place of the tens, there's a 9, or we can say it's 90. And we've go to the number line on this side, on the right-hand side. 90 tells us that the number is going to round up to the next 100. So there's no hundreds here. So the next 100 will be 100. So this will round up to 100 because in the place of the 10 there's a 9, or we can say the value of the 9 is 90, which tells us it will go up. Now we use the knowledge of the number line to use it in 9-digit numbers. So here we have 138,746,524. Again, when we round off to the nearest 100, we need to look at the tens. Here we have 20. Go back to your number line. 20 tells us it's going to go back. So we're going to, the 100 here is 500. So the 20 is telling us, because it's going back, it's actually staying the same. So if I'm rounding this off, 138,746,000. The 100 stays the same, so it stays 5. And then when we round off, the number becomes a round number. So that means that you will only have zeros after that. Okay. Now let's go to the next one by B. 965,254,130. So the 100 here is 100, and the 10 that we're working with is 30. So go back to your number line. 30 means it's going to go back to 0. So then your 100 will stay the same. It will stay 100 here. So then use the rounding off sign. All the digits in front of that 100 will stay the same. 965,254,000, and then we have 100, and all the others, the tens and the euros, change to zeros because it's rounded up. Right, then the last one, the value of the 100 here is 1, and we need to look at the 10, which tells us what's happening. So this is 10, 10 rounds back to 0. So in this case, the 100 stays the same. So rewrite all these digits in front of the 100. So it's 846,324,000, and then the 100 stays the same, and the rest of them changes to zeros. So now you have rounded off to the nearest 100. Let's go to rounding off to the nearest 1,000. Okay, so when we looked at rounding off to the nearest 10, the units told us what to do. When we round off to the nearest hundreds, the tens tells us what to do. And when we round off to the nearest thousands, the hundreds tells us what to do. So this number line here is not very clear, but I will tell you what's written here. This is the hundreds. So it's 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, and then we end off with 1,000. Now, just like rounding off to nearest 10 and 100, we also draw a line between the 400 and 500. So then the hundreds, if the number contains 100 or a 200 or a 300 or 400, that means you're going to round down to the previous 1,000 or 0. If the hundreds contain a 500 or a 600, 700, 800 or 900, that means you're going to round up to the next 1,000. Okay, right, so now we've got these numbers that do not have thousands, but they have hundreds, which can tell us whether we're going to add 1,000 or not. Okay, so again, ask yourself what helps us to know what's going to happen to the 1,000. It is the hundreds. So underline the hundreds. Okay, so in this case, it is 115 here, so the 100 is represented by a 1. So go to your number line and see, okay, I've got 100, so that means it's going to go back to the previous 1000 or 0. So there's no other thousands here, so this is going to go back to 0. Okay, now in this case, look at the hundreds again. This is 438, so in this one will be 400, and that means 400 also go back to the previous 1000, or if there's no 1000, it will go back to 0. Okay, in this case we have 800 in the hundreds place, so now we are on this side of that line, which means it's going to round up to the next 1000. So the next 1000 will be 1000 because there are no other thousands here, so you round up to 1000. Okay, oh, I just want to correct this. It must say 1000 here. Okay, now we're going to use this in terms of 9-digit numbers. I'm just going to write the answer of this one here. Right, so we have to go underline the thousands. Here we have a 6, and what value will tell us what happens to the thousands? The hundreds. In this case, we have a 4, and what will tell us what will happen to that 1000? The hundreds. Okay, let me just stop there and then I'll end off with the last one. So in this number we have 6,000, and then with the hundreds is represented by 500. So go to your number line and see, okay, I've got a 500 here, which means we're going to round up to the next 1000. So the next 1000 after 6,000 is 7,000. So all your digits in front of the thousands will remain the same, but the 6 will change to 7, and then you will end off with zeros because it's a rounded number. Okay, so then we're going to write 138,740,000, and now be careful, the 6 becomes a 7,000, and then the rest of them will be zeros. So remember that rounding off sign. Okay, now we use the same method here. Underline the thousands and tell yourself which place value is going to tell me what's going to happen to the thousands, and that will be the digit on the right hand side. So that is a 1, so that means that is 100 here. So 100 tells us that's going to go back to 0 or to the previous 1000. So this, we have 1000 here, we have 4000. So this 100 tells us that the 4000 is going to stay the same. So rewrite all the digits in the front. 965,250,000, and now the 4 remains the same, 54,000 with the zeros at the end. Okay, and then we end off with the last one, 846,324,117. Underline the thousands because we are running off to thousands, and then identify the hundreds. So here we have 100 goes back to 0, and then the 1000 is 4. So that means it will also remain the same. So then I'm going to write this one's answer here. So 846,324,000, which stays the same, and then the zeros at the end. Right, so then now you know how to round off to the nearest 5, 10, 100, and 1000. Right, so now I want them to go and use their knowledge and go and do the following work for me. In their DBE math books, I want them to do on page 80 to 83, and then they can go to Green Shoots and then practice it also using Brain Quest 3.